Hey everyone, it's me, Aaron, and welcome to our annual retrospective of our favorite things from video games from the previous year. And when I think of 2020, I think of boss fights. Probably because the entire year felt like one big life or death struggle, but that is way too serious for this video. But also because I always appreciate a good boss fight in a game, and man did last year deliver. Every year when we do our best boss fights list, I always worry about whether or not I'm going to be able to fill this entire thing up, but this year, I seriously could have done a top 20. Last year was phenomenal for big baddie battles. Now before we begin, a few ground rules. Number 1, only one boss fight per game. Simple enough. Secondly, these are not the hardest boss fights. No, they are the fights that we enjoyed the most, meaning that yes, difficulty will play something of a role in the decision, but we're also going to look at things like the mechanics of the fight, how inventive or memorable the combat was, but we'll also look at the emotional impact of the fight. In other words, how did we feel during the battle? How important it was to the story? How huge and epic the setting was? Also, these are not the best villains of the year, far from it. Sometimes a truly amazing villain has a really weak fight, and sometimes a really flat villain has a mind-blowing battle. And lastly, because many of these fights will come at pinnacle moments in their games, there are spoilers aplenty here. So I will start each entry off by telling you what the game is, and if you have not beaten that game yet and you do care about spoilers, then please check the time code and jump ahead to the next selection. There, you've all been warned, my hands are clean, nothing more I can do here, so let's go ahead and dive into number 10.
Crash Bandicoot, it's about time.
Our first entry comes from Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time. And Crash Bandicoot 4 was a return to form for the orange bouncing spinning marsupial with some of the tightest platforming of this generation. And all of that was put to the test in your big final battle with Dr. Cortex, who, after having the shortest change of heart in video game history, turns evil once more and steals all 4 of the new masks you acquired throughout the game, and was now going to use them to power his ultimate weapon. This is kind of a genius twist on what you would expect from a final boss fight in a platformer. Normally, you would think, hey, I got all these powers throughout the game, the smart thing would be for me to use them all in the big final boss fight. Instead, this flips that equation on its head and says, no. Now you have to see what it's like. Now you have to go back to your basics while the bad guy now has all the powers you did. I was not prepared to have my expectations subverted by a Crash Bandicoot game, but this twist combined with how this fight tests your thumbs to jump, duck, and dive for your life across an ever-changing platform makes for one heck of a send-off to easily the best Crash Bandicoot game in decades. Number 9, Shriek from Ori and the Will of the Wisp. In Ori and Will of the Wisp, our favorite little glow-in-the-dark forest sprite crashes into a new land and has to rescue his little owl friend. But as soon as they arrive, they learn that there is a large, ominous bird spraying decay and darkness throughout the land. This monster known as Shriek becomes the big threat that you will have to face at the end of the game. And man, oh man, the way that they hype this fight up is done just right. When you first land, you face off with the giant wolf, and you can't beat them, so you have to escape, knowing that eventually you're going to have to face them again later on. Only to find, nope, Shriek killed them off screen because they're even bigger and badder than the big bad thing that you couldn't beat. So before you can even face Shriek, you can already feel the dark shadow of their influence just creeping over everything, and you can feel the pressure that is coming from them just building and building as the game goes on. And when you actually face this giant monster, your platforming skills will be put to the test like never before. I'm not kidding you, my fingers actually hurt after this fight because at the end of the battle, Shriek destroys the ground that you've been standing on and has projectiles raining down from the sky, and in order to continue the fight, you have to ricochet off these falling projectiles in order to constantly stay airborne while trying to fight Shriek, and yes, that is as hard as it sounds, but darn does it feel good to finally finish them off. Okay, this next one comes from The Last of Us Part 2. And remember what I said about spoilers and skipping ahead? Yeah, if you haven't played this game, skip ahead now. I'll even give you some extra time for this one, because believe me, you do not want to have this one spoiled for you. Okay, everyone ready? It's a big one. Here's your last chance. Okay, here goes. At number 8, from The Last of Us Part 2, Ellie. What? But Ellie is the protagonist of the game. How can she be a boss fight? Yeah, that's what makes this fight so memorable. For the first half of the game, you play as Ellie as she goes down a dark road looking for revenge, slowly descending until she's acting as much like a villain as the group she had been chasing after. But then, right at the pinnacle moment of the game, where you finally confront Abby, who you had been hunting down this entire time, the game then flashes a few days back, and now you're playing as Abby, and the game puts you inside of Abby's head. You see her past, you see the terrible things that she did to kick the whole game off, and you understand it was spurred on by the same need for revenge that Ellie is now obsessed with. You see that Abby started at the point where Ellie ended up. But over the course of the next few days, Abby finds people that makes her reconsider what she's done, makes her want to change and be better. So essentially, you start the game off playing a hero who becomes a villain, then you play as the villain as they become a hero. And now, when you get back to that big climactic moment where Abby and Ellie finally confronted each other, you're no longer playing as Ellie as she's about to fight Abby, you're now playing as Abby as she fights against Ellie, in what I think is one of the best twists on a boss fight ever. This is made even better by the fact that you can hear Ellie setting up all the traps and using all the tools that you gained as her over the course of the game. Playing real head games with the player as you have to sit there and wonder if you actually help power up this final boss all on your own. The only reason why this fight isn't any higher on this list is simply because, well, The Last of Us Part 2, while it does have many things going for it, a rich and unique combat system isn't really one of them. So the actual mechanics of this fight weren't all that memorable, and they weren't exactly that fun to actually play through. However, when it comes to the actual surprise of this moment, when it comes to how it was set up, when it comes to the raw emotional impact of this fight, it is mind-blowing. Okay, we're now moving into number 7, and I will let you know right now, this is when we are getting deep into this list, and these next few fights are all stellar quality, and it was hard to choose between them. The next 5 spots on this list kept shifting around over and over. I have shuffled them around 3 times while just writing this sentence in the script alone. That is not an exaggeration, by the way. I mean that literally. The quality level of these next couple fights are so close to each other. But sadly, I did have to put them in some kind of an order. So at number 7, from Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, it's your final battle with the Tinkerer. Now, the battle itself is great. It does give you plenty of chances to show off what Miles can do as you jump and zip around past the Tinkerer's weapons. But what makes this fight work so well is the emotional impact. This entire game is about Miles having to deal with the crushing responsibility of being Spider-Man and everything that comes with that title. And at the end of the game, he has to stop his old friend who has become the villainous Tinkerer from blowing up all of Harlem. And in that moment, after losing so much, after facing so many trials and having the snot kicked out of him, we see Miles stand back up and we watch as he truly becomes Spider-Man. We watch him charge in to save the day with the big orchestral score blaring behind him in a way that matches the biggest superhero moments. When you dodge at the perfect time and everything slows down, you can feel Miles becoming the A-class hero that he wants to be. The way that everything in this setting and the combat works hand in hand with the emotional impact of this scene is truly, well, no pun intended, amazing.
Don't make me kill you! You can't win! Why do you keep fighting?
Because I'm
Spider-Man!
Number 6, Otakimaru from Nioh 2. Nioh 2 is nothing but one incredible boss fight after another. So if this was the final fight of the game, they had to go all out. There are 2 different stages to the Otakimaru fight. In the first stage, you watch as he constantly shifts between your character's 3 different yokai forms, essentially forcing you to fight against 3 versions of yourself at once. But then, when they transform, they become a new form that is essentially all of your yokai forms merged into one, wielding 4 swords, each with different elemental attacks that they can send your way, or even just summoning down a storm of swords that rain down upon the stage. However, the mechanics of this fight aren't the reason it's my favorite from the game. No, that once again comes from the emotional side of this battle, and hoo boy, this is going to take some explaining. Okay, here's the quickest Cliff Notes version of the plot of Nioh 2 that I can possibly give you. You play as a warrior who is half yokai, and you have problems controlling your inner monster until you meet Tokichiro, who is able to help you control it. Tokichiro is a light-hearted, kind fellow. So much so that in the world of Nioh, some people have animal spirits that follow them around, and Tokichiro's spirit is a monkey to reflect his friendly nature. However, he had a rough life, and slowly he gets tempted by Otakimaru to turn to the dark side for wealth and power. Slowly going from your closest, most trusted ally to a villain who you have to fight and kill. But his story isn't over with yet, because Otakimaru now wants to use Tokichiro's body to possess it and become real. Okay, I'll admit that's not entirely what's happening in the story, but again, this is the super simplified version of the story. That's the best you're gonna get. Anyway, that's where this final fight comes in. You intercept Otakimaru as he tries to possess Tokichiro, and you have to fight him inside your own body. Now in Nioh, all the bosses can summon out a darkness that covers the screen, and when this happens, they go Super Saiyan and their already high difficulty levels burst through the roof. But what happens when Otakimaru summons out his darkness? Tokichiro's monkey spirit leaps out of nowhere and starts fighting him off, while you hear Tokichiro's voice calling out to you, telling you not to worry because he's there by your side. He continues to cheer you on and encourage you throughout the fight, all the way up to the big climactic final clash. I'll be honest with you guys, I am a sucker for boss fights where your friends suddenly appear out of nowhere to help you. I love it. It's one of my favorite things in a boss fight. And if that friend happens to be someone who turned to the dark side, who then comes back to their senses to try and redeem themselves, even better. And in that moment, when this little monkey popped out and I heard Tokichiro saying they were there with me until the end, I got a rush of all those moments I had with him throughout this game, of how close our characters had become, and I found an emotional depth in this final fight that I was not expecting.
Okay, you're almost there. Come back to me,
Number 5 comes from the Final Fantasy VII Remake, Rude and Reno. If you played the original Final Fantasy VII, then you'll remember the moment the plate fell on Sector 7. And in the remake, they captured the tension and the scope of this apocalyptic event perfectly. You really felt like this entire city was being wiped out. Like everyone you had met up until now was going to die if you did not get to the top of this tower and stop it. As Cloud, you race up one flight of stairs after another, facing down wave after wave of enemies, watching your closest allies be killed right in front of you as you are helpless to stop them, but you have to keep going because you have to get to the top of the plate, otherwise this entire town is done for. But when you finally reach that top, there is one last obstacle, Rude and Reno. And not going to lie, fighting 2 special agents 1,000 feet in the air atop a burning tower that's threatening to topple over is already one hell of a set piece. As you face them down, you know you have to get through them in order to save everyone below you. And that was true for the original game, but somehow the remake managed to up that motivation because the entire game is about you knowing what is going to happen. You know how bad things are going to get. and you have to try and stop it. This entire game is about fighting fate and trying to change your destiny. And you see, throughout this game, little tiny things do happen that make you actually stop and think, could I actually do this? Can we actually change the events of the original game? And as you are climbing this massive staircase and you're watching your friends die, you see these continuity creeps floating around ensuring that nothing changes. But you can't help but think it's possible. You can't help but think maybe you can stop the plate from falling. So if you're going to prevent the catastrophe that happened in the first game and truly change fate, then this battle is where it has to happen. Our next fight at number 4 comes from Ghost of Tsushima, and this would be another great opportunity to remind people that if you have not played these games, then skip ahead to avoid spoilers because wow, is this a big one. Throughout Ghost of Tsushima, you've been following Jin as he tries to free his home from the Mongol invaders. But in order to do this, he has to go against the way of the samurai that has been taught to him ever since he was a child by his uncle, Lord Shimura. As the story goes on, you learn about the deep connection Jin has with his uncle. You see how much their history means to the two of them. You can feel how much they care about each other. But Jin's uncle is determined to follow the path of the samurai, and it puts him and Jin at odds. Finally, Shimura is tasked with taking out his nephew, and this leads to the final moment of the game, where Jin and Shimura have to have one final duel. The setting of this fight is beautiful. The stakes and the backstory going into it are huge, probably higher than in any other fight on this list. The only reason it's not any higher is because honestly, I thought this fight was kind of easy. I mean, compared to everything else that you've been through throughout the game and how much you've leveled up by this point, it wasn't really that much of a challenge, but the emotional weight behind it is second to none. Our number 3 fight comes from Yakuza Like a Dragon, and as I said, I could only choose one fight per game, and it was so hard to pick which fight to include from here. There are 2 fights in here that are just a hair apart from each other, and I'm pretty sure if you play this game, then you already know which 2 fights I'm talking about. But in the end, I had to pick one, and I am choosing the battle with Goro Majima and Taiga Saejima. Yakuza Like a Dragon, for most of the game, is very separate from the previous Yakuza games, as you play a man who spent almost 20 years in prison and now finds himself sent away to a new town where he has to build a new life for himself. So while you get little hints and references to the events of the previous games, for the most part, you're following brand new characters in brand new locations with their own unique storyline, so you don't really see that much crossover when it comes to the previous franchise. But there comes a moment where you have to race into a Yakuza headquarters looking for answers. And as you are about to reach your destination, you hear this. Anyone who is a Yakuza fan knows that laugh, and this moment caused all the hairs on the back of our necks to stand up and goosebumps to run up and down our arms. Yes, 2 of the most legendary badasses from the Yakuza series strolled onto the scene, and now they were going to face off with Ichiban and his team. But as shocking as this reveal was, the actual fight itself is one of the most intense battles in the game. As I said, Goro Majima is one of the toughest customers in this game's history, and this fight lived up to that. To start with, he's almost 10 levels higher than anyone else you have faced up to this point. Secondly, even though this game interprets real-world weapons and attacks into magical RPG terms, most people still fight with pretty realistic skills and abilities. But after a few hits, Goro summons out doppelgangers. Yeah, he makes clones of himself. No clue how. He can just do that because he's Goro freaking Majima. And these aren't shadow clones where if you hit them once then they go down. No, each of these clones have their own chunky life bars, making them tougher than the normal enemies that you have faced up until this point. So now, Goro went from being one enemy who was already way stronger than anybody on your team to having his own one-man backup crew that was still stronger than anybody else you've gone up against. All this comes together to make Majima one of the biggest threats in the game, but if you stick with it, you keep an eye on your health, then he can go down. Which is when Taiga jumps in. Yeah, when I fought Goro, I was sweating bullets trying to survive his initial assault, but when I got his life bar down halfway, I let out a sigh of relief and I started to think I could actually do this. At which point I realized I had totally forgotten, oh right, he's got a human tank waiting in the reserves. At this point, Taiga jumps in to crush whatever hope you had left. He's resistant to almost everything you can dish out. Hits like a Mack truck, and he and Goro can now dish out a combo attack that can decimate your life bar in the blink of an eye. As I said, there is another fight in this game that is arguably just as good, if not better than this one. But for me, the fact that this is the first big appearance for a major Yakuza character, the way they're revealed, how the second half of the fight ramps things up, and just the brutal leap in difficulty compared to anything else you have seen up until this point, makes this my winner. Alright, we are almost done, and our number 2 fight comes from Doom Eternal. Hey, you know what's a great thing to do in Doom Eternal? Rip and tear. You know what the final boss fight of Doom Eternal is? Ripping and tearing like you have never ripped and teared before. The Icon of Sin isn't just a huge monster capable of destroying an entire city just by going out for a Sunday stroll. He also summons out every monster you face throughout the game and just throws them at you, wave after wave. It's basically just that scene from Leon the Professional as he keeps chucking everyone at you.
Benny, bring me everyone.
What do you mean, everyone?
That's what's so great about this final battle. It basically takes the stuff that you love about Doom Eternal. The fast-paced, crazy blasting and jumping and shooting that was already pushing your reflexes to the limits and cranks it up to levels you didn't even know this game could reach. Seriously, when I was done with the Icon of Sin, I had to stop and just feel my chest because I thought my heart was going to burst out of my skin. I thought I was going to have a heart attack, and it is rare that I can say that about a game and mean it in a good way. And it's not just that this battle is low with so many monsters coming at you so fast, it's that the stages are loaded with every kind of power-up that you could possibly want, allowing you to just take the limiters off and go nuts. I mean, the BFG in any other Doom game is supposed to be your big legendary weapon that you save just for emergencies, that bring it out just for that one special time in the game kind of weapon. And they just load you up on so much ammo for it, you can go nuts with that thing. And so far, I've just been talking about the barrage of enemies you face. I haven't even brought up the fact that the Icon of Sin is trying to wipe you out as well, casting Meteor on you and trying to smack you down with his apocalyptic attacks, and to beat him, you have to blow off each part of their body one at a time. The final battle of Doom Eternal does what the final boss fight of any good game should do. Reminds you of everything that is great about the game while pushing you to use every single thing that you have learned throughout this experience. And the number 1 boss fight of 2020.
The world beyond my realm is not for you. You're going home.
Hades. Why is this the best fight of the year? Because the final boss fight should be the culmination of your entire journey, of everything you went through in the game all coming to a peak. And in Hades, you have to make it all the way from the lowest depths of the underworld up to the surface in one go. Otherwise, you are sent right back to the start. So when you finally make it up there, when Zagreus finally reaches the surface and he comes face to face with his dear old dad Hades, you know this is your final battle. And you know that if you don't win this, you have to start all over again. You have climbed and fought your way through over 70 levels to reach this point, and it could all be for nothing if you don't win this. And for most people, you're not even going to reach this point until almost 10 hours into your playtime. It is going to take you so many tries to reach this fight, and every time that you fail, you're going to hear Hades putting you down, reminding you of your place, telling you it's hopeless. So as you go into this battle, you have all of that backstory, all those insults and mockeries in your mind as well. There is so much riding on this battle, and thankfully the fight itself is able to match all that build-up. Hades can summon out other monsters from the underworld to fight you, turn invisible to sneak up on you, swing his spear around with a range that is next to impossible to escape, and worst of all, being Zagreus' father, he's got his own supercharged version of your abilities. He can send out his own cast that can get lodged into Zagreus, causing him to take extra damage, and even if you avoid these casts, they will then explode, sending a shockwave across the entire screen. There is so much to keep track of in this fight, but if you're prepared, if you watch closely, if your timing and reflexes are just that good, then you can do it. You can beat him. I will never forget how good it felt, after so many escape attempts, to finally bring the god of the underworld down. Only for him to reveal, psych, he's not done yet. Yeah, remember how I said he's got his own supercharged versions of your abilities? That includes your Death Defy ability, which lets you come back from a fatal blow. I know a boss having a secret second form is nothing new in a game, but this was the first time in a while that when they stood back up, I remember actually being genuinely stunned, even though I should have seen it coming a mile away. But then, after getting him down a second time, he's finally done. And after so many deaths, after seeing Zagreus get beaten down and sucked into the river Styx over and over again, it felt so rewarding to see it happen to the big boss himself. But here's the most incredible thing about this fight. In order to get the true final ending of the game, you have to beat Hades. Not once. No, you have to come back and do it 10 times. And what's amazing about this fight is that with the variety of moves you can attain, with the motivation you have to keep going in order to further the story, it felt great and fresh every single time. And that's why this is the #1 boss fight of the year. With every other fight on this list, I love them. I thought they were amazing experiences worth talking about and praising, but I don't know how many of them I would want to do 10 times in a row. But with Hades, I have beaten this guy over 30 times at this point, and it still feels great every single time. And that's why Hades is the best boss fight of the year. Or at least according to me. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I want to thank everybody who tuned in today to check out our list of our 10 favorite boss fights from last year. Remember, we have also got our top 10 favorite games of the year list coming up soon. So if you want to see that, then make sure that you click that subscribe button, and you can always click on some of our suggested videos, including our top 10 boss fights of 2019. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Stay safe out there, and come back next time.